Hello everyone and welcome. So in today's video I'm going to be talking about the 6 wives of Henry VIII and how each of their stories can make a great D&D game. So as we all know, providing you've seen my previous videos, the game I'm writing is based on the time of Anne Boleyn and her imprisonment in the Tower. Now I've just been to a fascinating exhibition in London's National Portrait Gallery called The 6 Wives of Henry VIII, and it goes into a lot of detail about their relationship with him and England's politics in terms of their religious views and all of that. Anne Boleyn is the most famous of them. The other 5 have stories that are equally fascinating and tragic. So I'm going to talk about them in chronological order and begin with Katherine of Aragon. Katherine of Aragon was a Spanish princess and the youngest child of Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon. Her parents' marriage unified Spain, making them the first proper king and queen of Spain. Their actions throughout their reign laid the foundations for making Spain the most powerful country in the world, especially when they financed Christopher Columbus's voyage to the Western Hemisphere, or New World as they called it in 1492. For all of these reasons, Katherine was an extremely eligible bride. At the age of 3, she was betrothed to Arthur Tudor, the son of King Henry VII of England. She did go on to marry Arthur, but he died shortly after their wedding. After his death, well, quite a while after, but we won't go into that, she married his younger brother Henry VIII. It's important to know she was married to Arthur, as this was one of the reasons Henry VIII gave in his request or plea for a divorce from the Pope when he wanted to marry Anne Boleyn. Like Anne Boleyn, Katherine had a very strong character and was highly educated. She even was prepared to ride into battle when Henry VIII was in France. For this reason, if I chose a class for Katherine, I think it would be Paladin, as she's very wise and understands what it's like to fight with valour. If I was creating a game based on her, I think I'd focus on maybe the time around the Battle of Flodden, which I think was the largest battle ever fought between England and Scotland. Katherine was in charge of a reserve arm, so she never saw action, but she was fully prepared to engage the Scottish troops had they broken through. Next up is a queen everyone has heard of, Anne Boleyn. Now I'm not going into much detail about her, as I have plenty of videos on the topic of her reign and influence already. But as we all know, she was deeply religious in the reformist sense, and like Katherine, she was very highly educated. For this reason, in my game, I made her a cleric, and Thomas Cromwell, who worked with Henry VIII to orchestrate her demise, is a wizard supervillain. After Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII married Jane Seymour, his favourite wife, because she provided him with the son he longed for. She also sadly passed away not long after giving birth, so if I'm honest, she wasn't around for as long as the others to annoy him, which also probably factored into her being his favourite. Now I'm not sure what class to make her. If I'm honest, nothing really stands out, which saying that out loud sounds quite harsh. But what we do know about her was that she was very timid and quiet, in comparison with Katherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn. She also wasn't very educated and apparently could only read and write her own name. But you know what? I'll make her a rogue. Hear me out. So her family was in a strange situation in that they were incredibly wealthy, but didn't wield any influence. So if I were to roll with this, we could perhaps frame the Seymours as upper-class rogues. Maybe we could weave in some sort of rags to riches story. In reality though, the Seymours were descended from the Normans and were rewarded with land when the Seymour, or St. Maur men of yesteryear, fought wars in France. After Jane's death, Henry went in search of his next and 4th wife, who was Anne of Cleves. The goal of this marriage was to form an alliance between England and Germany. Marrying for love is overrated anyway. Before Henry VIII, Anne was actually betrothed to a French duke when she was 11. However, because the duke was under 10, the arrangement was cancelled. Unfortunately, or fortunately for Anne, her marriage with Henry had a similar fate, and Henry annulled their marriage. Providing Anne went quietly, which she did, she would live like a proverbial queen. For her good behaviour, she was rewarded with numerous properties and became an honorary member of the king's household. So if Anne of Cleves was a character in Dungeons and Dragons, what would she be? Well, she wasn't the most highly educated of Henry's wives, but she was incredibly wise, and I'd argue had a natural intelligence or intuition. So for this reason, I think I'll make her also a rogue. Now, she wasn't very charismatic in the sense of how she gelled with Henry VIII, but she was very good at forming relationships with his children, and loved a bit of gambling as a pastime. So I'd say she'd fit in with the rogue archetype, maybe more of a genteel rogue than a vagabond type though. Our next queen is Katherine Howard. Now I think this was the most tragic tale of all Henry VIII's wives. When Katherine was executed, she was only around 19. Yes, 19, basically a teenager. Henry VIII was in his late 40s when he married Katherine. She also didn't have the best start in life, as her dad was a perpetual gambler, and when she was born, she was likely viewed as a burden to her family and one more dowry to pay. So with regards to her character class, it's very tricky to choose something for her, as she died so young, and there isn't really that much information on her to paint a reliable picture of what she was like in terms of her interests and, well, personality. I mean, if I made Henry a bard, maybe Katherine Howard could be a bard too. Perhaps that's something they could have had in common, as, let's be honest, there wasn't much else. Last up is Katherine Parr, our survivor. Like Anne Boleyn and Katherine of Aragon, she was very well educated, but unlike them, she had the benefit of knowing how queens should behave around the king and understood the consequences if they were to step out of line. This knowledge proved particularly useful when an arrest warrant was drawn up after an argument she had with the king about religion. Katherine Parr had seen the warrant and shortly after found the king to say she had only been arguing about religion to take his mind off his painful ulcerated legs. Ugh. Anyway, when she was about to be arrested, the king got angry and dismissed everyone away. So if I were to choose a class for Katherine, I think it would be cleric like Anne Boleyn. In fact, I'd say Katherine Parr and Anne Boleyn were very similar in some ways. For example, their passion for education and reform. Except where Anne failed, Katherine excelled. For example, she got on very well with Henry VIII's children and even brokered peace between them all. But Anne was married at a different time in Henry's life and was living under very different circumstances. So maybe we shouldn't be too harsh on her. But what do Henry VIII's wives teach us about Dungeons and Dragons? Well, I'd say quite a lot. If we were to go back to Dungeons and Dragons' roots, it was heavily influenced by medieval war games and was naturally very political, whether it intended to be or not. So if we look at Henry VIII's wives as individuals with their own agenda to push, instead of just collectively viewing them as one entity, we can create a whole world based on their lived experiences. In one of my previous videos I talked about Dungeons and Dragons and solo play, and you could easily choose one of Henry VIII's wives and create a game based on their life. And depending on how far you wanted to go, you could develop other characters and NPCs based on the historical events that affected them. Right, that's all for today folks, and I'll see you in the next one.